Good morning, everybody. My name is Samantha. Oops, I did not. Yeah, I did. Okay. My name is Samantha Mirabal. I'm with Mocha's application team. Here today to go over questions that were sent in ahead of time. If you have questions while we're live, and remember we're live on both Facebook and YouTube, type them in on the comments. I do have my printer running in the background. If it's too loud, let me know and I will go pause it. I think it should be okay because I'm close to the mic and that's not, but if it's a bother, just let me know. All right. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and start. Good morning, John. Thanks for joining. I'm going to go ahead and check both platforms are up. So there's YouTube and there's Facebook. So we are good to go. So I'm going to move those over. If you see me off looking on the left-hand side, that's going to be me looking at questions. Good morning, my Shepherd crew, Antoine, Scott, everyone. Thanks for joining. All right. So I'll start off with the questions that were sent in ahead of time. And like I said, if you have questions while we're live, just type them in the chat. Don't send them privately. I will not see those until someone emails me later. All right. So I had this question. How do I make a run stitch next to an object? And how do I change it so it jumps instead of runs? Okay. So I was scratching my head trying to figure out what you were actually asking, but this is what I think you've got. So I think you have a shape and you want a basting stitch. That's my assumption running around here. So there's a few different ways we can handle this, right? So if you have DesignShop Professional, then you can go into Object, Generate Basting Primer, and right here is this primer stitch, okay? This is how far away from your design that you want this thing to go, and that is the stitch length. So you can make it closer, further apart. If you want the jumps, your runs to be larger, you can make that a bigger number or whatever it might be. Okay. And that will create a run stitch around, but it'll behave more like a basting because see right here, my stitch length is really large. If I turn on this expanded point, you can see from point to point, these are some long stitches, so it's really easy to rip out later. So that's my assumption as to what you're wanting. But let me show you some other ways you can do it, right? So if I've got a shape, you can always, I usually copy and paste. And then with the first one, object, offset outline, and let's make it 40 because the last one I did 60. And then I can change element from one type to another, which is this one right here. So if I click on that, I can tell it to be a walk normal stitch, and I can replace. Okay, so now I got a walk. Now the stitch length is 20 right here, so that's pretty close stitches. If your goal is to rip it out, that's not going to be fun for you. So what I would do in that case is make this, between 40 and 60 points. That's going to spread your needle penetrations out, so they're much further. It'll behave like little jumps from one to another. Making a needle stitch, moving 60 points, making another stitch. So the other things to consider is the tie-in and tie-outs. So if you've got now this is very specific, if your goal is to rip this stuff out, you might want to consider changing this to a style 2 and then making your width of this something bigger. Why? So it's larger and easier to pull. Right? If it's really small, it's going to be really nested in the material and it's going to be harder to cut it out. Okay, so that's just, food for thought on that. So it's pretty much that simple. You can tell it to offset from your shape. If you have professional, you can use that feature of the primer stitch or the basting stitch. This one I use the Generate Basting Primer Stitch. Okay. So there's a question typed in, what does style 2 do? The style 2, so, stop that, properties, clicking too much. Tie-in and tie-offs right here. If you click on this guy right here, show tie types, this shows you what the different tie-ins and the different lock stitches are, right? So a style 2 is one I don't like using and I don't use it often because it's easy to pull out. But that's, if you're using it for a basting stitch, why you'd want to use it. It's a single back stitch and then it starts sewing. Okay, so it will sew back one stitch and then it will run along its business. Okay, So it's, like I said, not my ideal for a lock stitch, but it's there for you. Style 3 does 2 back stitches and then it'll run. Your style 4 does this little half stitch off and then it jumps over it all and runs. Your style 5 is really nice and secure, but it's extremely visible. It draws an X. So for a lock stitch, man, is it aggressively strong. But it does tend to be, depending on what you're doing, it's a bit of an eyesore. So yeah, these are just the different types of lock stitches. The style 2, it just is easy to pull out. Okay, does that help, Alexandra? Alexandra, sorry. Okay. So, any other questions typed in so far? No. Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. How do we ensure a circle sews out as a circle on a cap? Okay. So this one, when you're working on when you're working on caps, or even, I know this also from engraving on with lasers, you can take a circle, and if you engrave it on a curved surface, when you look at it, it's going to look squished. So you have to extend and stretch it out in that X direction, in this X direction, to compensate for the fact that it's going to look squished. So it's going to look like an oval. So I was talking to some of the guys, and their recommendation was to stretch it in X by about 2%. So you can come over here and turn off. All right, what did I just do? When I realize I'm going fast, I try to stop myself. All right, so you select your design. Step 1. All right, down here where the W or the H is, if you click on either one of those, it'll bring up the same thing. Okay, if you turn off the lock, that's going to stop it from scaling equally, right? You only want to stretch it out in that X direction, the width. So I can say, make that, not 120, 102%, and you'll stretch it out by about 2% that way, so that it'll help compensate for the fact that it's going to look a little squished. All right, so that's pretty much it. So if you have a circle, I go to a new file, and I draw myself a circle. I would come over here again, click on the W or the H, turn off the lock. 102, 103, somewhere in there. You're gonna stretch it out in that X direction. 2 to 5%. I think Scott said he likes 2% for all of that. And when it sews out, that'll help compensate for the fact that it looks more oval than round. Okay. All right. You establish parameters on a single line, then you go to fills. It's taken on the parameters of the other ones. Yeah. So from version 10 to a version 11, changes were made because of the vectors, so that the properties are more global across all the different elements, so that vector conversions go a little smoother for the folks who don't quite understand all the different nuances with settings. You can set them to be whatever you want. And that's kind of tying into this question here. But yes, if you set up properties up at the front, it's going to apply to everything. So you'll have to adjust that accordingly. But down here, you said, hey, it doesn't revert to a 90-degree angle for the underlay, which is true. That, again, is a change on the standard properties for V11. But you can change that. So if you don't like the crosshatch pattern, so you see here, it's putting a crosshatch under there. So if that's not to your liking and you want to go back to a 90 degree, you can go into the properties, go to your underlay, and change this to be whatever you want. So you can see it's set to 45. So you could do a 90 and turn that one off. And then it will go to a 90-degree angle and just overwrite your save to defaults permanently. So if you want to go to something else and you have a preference, go for it. Change it to what you want it to be. I personally adore the new settings a lot. So I only use the auto anymore because I really like that crosshatch. It sews so well. Anyway, that's just a personal preference of mine. So I tend to use auto on everything nowadays, but you can do it however you want, and you can overwrite the properties. So if there are specific settings you want, just overwrite your defaults permanently, and that way whatever you want as your default will now be the new settings. Okay. Yeah, so that was a change to the base parameters, but you can override them. Okay, so this one is me badly paraphrasing a video I got. So I'm going to basically, how do I add a line to an object that's a closed shape, and also how do I move the starts and stops if I don't have one, right? So a few different things. This guy. All right, so pretend the green circle wasn't there, and you generated a shape, and it only, let's see if I can do it. If I draw a circle. No, that one has it. If for some reason the green circle is missing and all you have an X, and you want to move your start and stop somewhere else, or maybe you just don't want to grab these and drag them around, what can you do, right? So you want to move your starts and stops. If you click on a shape, over here, these 4 buttons are what I call the editing group. So you've got your digitizing tools, which are these top 8. You've got your editing, and then these are various degrees of selections of sorts, right? So on my editing grouping, if I click on this circle and X, that's insert entry and exit points. When you click on that, notice down here, it's giving you a hint of what it wants. Input the entry point, so that's going to be your green circle. Where do you want this shape to start? So let's say I want that to start right there. Cool, it puts that. Down here, it's telling you what it's expecting next. So input your exit point. Well, let's say I want it to end right there. All right, so now you'll see there's the start, there's the stop. I can, of course, drag these around to suit my needs, right? So I can grab those, but every now and then I'll get into a battle between the points and my circle and X, and it annoys me. So rather than trying to select them, because I don't feel like zooming in, I'm being lazy, but I'll click on this. First click is start, second click is stop, and there are my points. Okay, so another question we had was, okay, let's say, all right, I'm going to move a bunch of points real quick, fast. So, all right, I'm going to select all of these points here. I'm going to left click and drag. So I've got an ugly shape here. All right, so let's say I want to put a line across here, okay? Well, notice if I drag that across, it doesn't really work, right? So I can split this element right here, and now I've got multiple options, right? So I can take this spot that ended, and now I can drag it over, and then make those connect again, right? So that's one way you could do it. Or, so let's undo that, or I can just undo. All right, so I can make this be my start and stop point, start, stop there, and then I can just draw a walk normal across. Boy, that's a really ugly pumpkin, but you get the idea. All right, so there's different ways you can handle it. It's just a matter of thinking about how do you want it done. If you want it all as one element, you'll have to split it and drag a line across there, right? So it's not a closed shape. Or you just make it end there, and where your element ends, now you start a new element and you draw across. So I have a question typed in. Without the center design button, is there an easier way to drag something onto the axis rather than messing with your mouse to get it exact? Well, I mean, you can select everything. So if I select everything, there's different ways you can move it, right? So I can left click and drag. Notice if I'm wanting to hold it so it's dragging straight up or straight to the side, like here, it's locked in that direction. I'm holding the alternate key on my keyboard, right? So if I want to drag it straight up, I can do it that way, right? Or again, I can hold my alternate key, drag it straight over, there. I can, of course, center the design this way using my center design button. If you want to move stuff, not with your mouse, but with your keyboard, all right? So, of course, I can drag this around, but Control, let's see, click, Control, and click. Is it Control or Shift? There. All right, so Shift. All right, so Shift and left and right arrow will move it one at a time. I think it's a point. If I hold the Shift Control, notice it's doing larger jumps. So Shift by itself is small jumps, Shift Control is larger jumps. I'm sorry, Shift Alt. I'm telling you the wrong thing. So it's Alt and Shift Alt. Shift Control does really large jumps. I think they're centimeter. I honestly don't remember what they all amount to. I just know Control and Shift are big jumps. Control and Alt are smaller jumps. And Shift and arrows are really tiny jumps, movements. Okay, so it's a combo of using your Shift, Control, and Alt key along with moving your arrows around. So yeah, you can move it exactly by just, let me turn on the grid, make it easier to see. So that's Shift right there. So Shift and my upwards arrows, Shift Alt, that's Shift Alt, Shift Control are big jumps. See that? Okay. Does that help? Alexandra, let me know. All right, what else do we have? No others typed in yet? Okay. Oh. All right, so connecting point for a circle. All right, so the question is, where is my picture? My ugly picture. All right, how would I round this to make a circle, that line? Well, the easiest way to do that to get a perfect round is add a point in the middle. Honestly, it doesn't really matter where you put it. And a left click is a triangle, but again, it doesn't matter if it's a left or right. And then I hold the Control key and drag. So while I'm dragging it as a Control key, notice it gives me pretty circles. So I just hold my Control key and drag it, and it will make a nice smooth circle. And it would help if I pay attention to where I put my points, but there you go. So you can get a nice pretty arc there by holding Control and dragging. How do you get 2 points to line up? Well, so just click them together. So, all right, there's two different ways you can do it. If you want to close a shape, right? So let's say I'm going to draw with this because it's wider. All right, and I want to land right there for this last to close the shape. If I hold the Shift, rather than clicking on that to close it, if I hold Shift Enter, it will close it exactly and make those points right on line up. And now I have a perfectly closed shape. So Shift Enter will close it for you, so you don't have to worry about clicking close. There is a threshold, and Scott will know it. Me, I just don't pay much attention to it. But if you go overlap those, it's smart enough to know that it wants you to have those connected, and it will connect them for you. So you just drag your wireframe points on top of one another. Okay, and it will automatically connect them for you. Tara, does that help any? So Shift Enter will automatically close it. Dragging the point over will also help. All right, what else do we have? Okay, so we did those. We curved a point. Cool. Is there a way to see exactly where the last stitch was? So if I want to use a run stitch, I can click exactly where I left off from the last object. Yes, but I personally don't find that it has to be exact because it depends on your properties that you have set. But as long as you're darn close, it's good enough. But if I look at this shape, well, actually, if I go into digitize another element, you see that propeller right there? That propeller shows you where the last stitch was. Exactly, right there. So if I want to run stitch, I click on my propeller, and I draw my new shape, and they will it'll connect them and line up. Okay, so that propeller shows you where the last stitch of an element was, or the element right before it was. So anywhere I go, let me turn off. Oh, so there's the end of that one. The end of the circle is right there. The end of this line is down here. So that propeller shows you where the last stitch is for you to be able to go to it. I still use DesignShop version 10. When I send a design to Maya, you lose the colors. Make sure you're saving it as an OFM, and they don't appear on the Maya screen. So depending on the settings you have in the OS, it's going to show up differently. So if you go to Tools, Settings, and it's the second tab on that thing, there's a button that says Use Colors from Design, or it's a box you check. So use colors from design, it will show up only in the colors that you program in DesignShop, so in your OFM. If that box is unchecked, it's going to default and it's going to show up to whatever you have the thread tree colored as. Okay, so if your thread tree is colored straight gray, and what do I mean by thread tree? Let's see, I think I have pictures. Yeah, so if this thread tree is colored, then whatever thread colors you have here is how it's going to show up. If your thread tree is like this, all gray, your design will show up all gray. And that's in that Tools. Oh, I have a screenshot of it. Look at that. So Tools, Settings, Use Colors from Design. That button right there. Okay, so that's what's going to govern how it shows up in your OS. So those are the things I would look at. Back. Yeah, so that's what I would look at for this one. So another question you had, or someone had, I can trace my design, but if I try to move left or right or up or down, it doesn't go anywhere. I've restarted everything more than once. Okay, make sure you reset your design. So you can always delete jobs, delete machines, depending on which machine it is. That will help or not if something's stuck in the ethers. So the other way is make sure you do a design reset. And then you move it by doing hoop in your moving your pantograph, right? So it's a hoop button and your arrows, and it should move. So the only time I ever notice things not doing is if it thinks it's in the middle of something, you know, whether it's a trim immediate or it thinks it's sewing. It started and stopped, and now it's like, hey, but you don't really want to. But yeah, make sure you reset everything and then move it around and see how that works for you. And if not, see about calling tech support, let them log in and look at it, because I don't know if anything else really that would stop it from doing. Well, I mean, the only other way is if it's too large for your hoop, eventually it won't let you move anymore based on the hoop that's selected. So you can always try selecting a monstrous hoop to see if that might be what's driving it. Maybe there's an errant stitch in your design, something like that. Okay. Let's see, what other questions? Okay, so did I answer all these? I did that one. I did all those. I did that. Okay. So what other questions do you guys have before I call it a day? Scrolling through the chats to make sure I didn't miss anything. Hi, Rob. Thanks. Thank you all for joining. I don't see anything else, so I'll hold up for a little bit longer in case someone else has questions. Otherwise, I'm going to call it a day shortly. So, graphic to embroidery. So I think you're running an older version, so it's not going to show up as the same. So the graphic to embroidery thing. Let's see. C drive. Where's C drive? Oh, down here. C drive, designs, graphics. Pick a graphic. Let's do the chili pepper. Okay. So there's a few different ones you can use. You can use the stitch graphic region, which I find greatly entertaining. I don't really know why. It's really not that I find it magical and I love it. But so what that does, so this one right here, stitch graphic region, it works with pretty much whatever you want. It's predominantly, I use it mainly when I'm given JPEGs. It does kind of, as long as the JPEG's relatively decent quality, it'll go find the edges and of this area. So if I make this a different color, you can see it selected all of that for me. So again, I can say stitch graphic region, click on that. Now that's in version 10 as well as 11, right? So you can go through and individually get those areas and build up your design that way, right? So that's one option. You can always come into Graphic to Conversion Assistant. Now between, I know based on who's asking the question, V11 to V10, I don't have V10 on my computer anymore. It's arranged differently, but the steps are all still there. In V10, it's all up here. So like this color editing stuff and if I step through, right? So first, all of these and these guys in version 10 are kind of buried up here in different things. So basically you can go through and rearrange what order you want things to sew in. If there's multiple red regions, in this case there's not, there's only one, but you can tell it what order you want it to sew in. You can tell it where you want it to start and stop, you know, all sorts of things, and walk through it. If you want to give it splices, so let's say you want to add a stitch line along here to represent, all right, this is a bad example, but let's say you had a heart and you wanted a broken heart kind of sketch thing. Well, I can come over here and say, okay, insert this guy, and I can draw it in there. So I can draw splices through here. I can then come in and say, well, I want the stitch direction to run that way, and those sorts of things. And then you can just walk your way through it. All right, so it's pretty straightforward. You just kind of walk your way through it, creating the different things. I just bypassed everything rather than actually generating the stitch directions. And it will work it's a wizard. So you just step your way through it. Okay, so it's in V10. It's still there. It's just organized on the top bar and it doesn't help you as much with all the instructions on the side. Okay. Do I know how dense to make a fill? It really depends on what you're trying to do. You know, fills, so if I draw a fill, the default properties work pretty well. I think it defaults to 4. I changed mine to be 3.8 because I wanted a little bit more dense personally. So that's just my personal preference, but it depends on the material, right? So, and what thread size, those sorts of things. If you're sewing on performance wear, you got to be careful about making it super dense because you're going to end up causing puckers and issues with your fabrics by making it too dense. So how dense to make it? I like 3.8 for most things on heavier fabrics. And then I love auto underlay. Scott and Nate and all the guys did a fabulous job defining that. Yeah, for Alexandra, the bar up top, if you look at the videos for V11, all those same buttons that are described are in the V10. It's just up at the top. And it works pretty much the same way. It's just, there's no help to it. You just got to kind of click through them. And I don't have any videos to share with you on V10 either because I dug around for them earlier this week trying to find some. Okay. What other questions might you guys have? Nothing? All right. Well, let me know what you want to learn for the graphic. How would you do an outline stitch rather than a fill? Oh, let me go get my chili pepper back. Okay. So I usually just get my fill, right? And then use what's going on here? Okay. And then go and do that conversion thing on it. So delete this. All right, so I got this guy. So I can use shift and click. So shift click will make it a running stitch. Select that, control and click will convert it over and turn it into a running stitch. If I want this to be a satin stitch, although looking at these, it's not going to like it when I do this. I'm just going to warn you guys that because of those corners. Hey, it did a pretty okay job. Anyway, how did I do that? I selected my line, I held the control key, and clicked on this guy. Question, can we stitch with yarn like some sewing machines? You can stitch with Burmilana. So Burmilana is what I call yarn. It's a 16 gauge, I think. I think it's 16 or 12. It's really thick. It looks like yarn. And yes, you can stitch with Burmilana. You need to pay attention to the properties of how you digitize for it. I think we have some good Q&A videos that were done. Plus, there's a good Q&A article on the Melco site, the Melco-service FAQ. If you search for micro chenille or Burmilana or something like that, it'll pop up. But yes, you've got to use larger needles, so a 90 or 100 needle. You've got to change your digitizing because that thread's so thick you can't use a 4.0 density. You're using closer to a 6 or 8 density on those sorts of things. Your stitch lengths from needle penetration to needle penetration are going to be longer. The manufacturers, I know Madeira makes Burmilana a wool variant as well as an acrylic variant, I believe. And both of those, they've got digitizing parameters that they tell you how it works. So what densities to use and those sorts of things. So I go off their recommendations, and they're fun. I did some upholstery with it. So to get a hand look, I used a bunch of Burmilana. It was fun. Although that wool made me scratchy. I found out I don't really like wool. So there's that. But it was really pretty. All right. What other questions might you guys have? We did get you the link to the Burmilana and the micro chenille things to check those out. Scroll through my questions, make sure I didn't. How would you do sequence? What do you mean? What would you like to sequence? Sequencing is just about changing the order of things to be the order you want it to sew, right? So, like this, it's a matter of just making decisions and moving the colors around so it's in the order you want, right? So if I want that to sew first, or maybe I want that to sew last. Madeira glow in the dark. All right, well, sorry, getting distracted by questions. Let me do this first. So sequencing is just a matter of dragging things to be in the order you want it to sew, right? So you got to think about it. If you want this line first, I'd drag it above. So I'd sew that, then this. So it's just rearranging stuff in your project view over here to be in the order you want it to sew, and that's your sequence. Is that what you're asking? Kritzia? I'm sorry, I'm gonna butcher your name, so I won't. I'm sorry. Krizita? Marie, let me know. Question on how to use glow-in-the-dark thread. So glow-in-the-dark thread's really brittle, right? So if you compare it, I meant the sequence like a ribbon sequence? I don't understand that question. I meant like a ribbon sequence. I still don't understand, I'm sorry. So for the glow-in-the-dark, I'll come back to that. So for the glow-in-the-dark, that thread's pretty brittle, meaning it doesn't, if you take the polyester thread, which this is, and you go to break it, you'll notice it takes some force to break. Whereas if you do the same thing with the glow, you barely pull on it and it snaps. So when you're working with the glow-in-the-dark thread, you got to up your active feed. You have to baby it. Remember, your active feed is how, if you think about it like a tensioning system, which I know I'm not supposed to think of it that way, but that's how my brain likes to work. The higher the number, the looser the thread. So I always say you got to baby those brittle threads. So you increase your active feed, that stops it from being able to pull super tight and snapping that thread, right? So you up your active feed some, and there's a balance between being too high and you get looping or false thread breaks or things like that, and too low and you're snapping your thread. And that really is just play with it some. So that's what you would do for there. Okay, so how would you do sequins? So the sequin head is something that has been discontinued, and there's not a ton of them out there. They only work on the V10 software, not the V11, things like that. I think they only actually work on the XTSs, maybe the XTs, I don't remember. But if you click on this guy here, you'll notice there's a sequin. So you've got your walk, and instead of normal, you change it to sequin. So if you're digitizing for someone with sequins, you can do that, right? So you would draw it out, you would tell it what type of sequin you're digitizing for, right? So what type. You would tell it what sort of pattern you want it to have. So you can do all of that using these things. So it's just, you would digitize your walks and then change the patterns and what sequin you want. Now, the key is, notice here, I don't want to be starting and ending. You have to pay attention. You have to use your manual stitches. You've got to be able to walk back through. So if I'm going to travel somewhere else to go over, you have to pay attention, because now you're going to have physical pieces of sequin on your design. So you can't just start doing a walk stitch from here over here like that. Okay, let me undo that. I can't just do that, because look, now I'm sewing through a bunch of sequins. See how they're all yellow? So that's warning me that's a bad idea. You don't want to do that. So when you're working with these sorts of things, you have to pay attention to where you start and end to be able to properly digitize it, so that you're not going to sew through those things. So you've got your walks, you have your manual stitches right here to allow you to do jumps back to the center, or to back up through your sequins and things like that. So it's digitizing for sequins is a different experience. You can do it with the software, but the attachment itself doesn't exist anymore. So Cruzita, hopefully that's it. Does that help? So yeah, you can digitize for it, but if you don't have the machine or the attachment, then you won't physically be able to sew with it. All right. What other questions do we have? All right, I don't see any. So I'm gonna guess that's everything for today. All right, y'all. Yeah, I don't see any others typed in. All right. Well, I'm going to call it a day. I've got to go try to fix my stupid sublimation printers decided to start banding on me, so I got to go do a capping station cleaning, so I got to go get some supplies. So that's my fun for the afternoon. But other than that, you guys have a fantastic week. Let us know what you want to learn about. You'll see I periodically post up the this little thing asking for questions on Facebook. So if you see that, type in your questions. I'll have stuff. I'll try to have answers ready for you. Another question just came in. Is there a needle good for faux leather? I use a 7511 ball. That's what I use all day long. So, that's my favorite. I use it a lot. So, 7511 ball. And I sew faux leather probably every day. At some point. All right. Any other questions? All right, y'all. Well, let us know what you want to learn about. Have fun sewing, and I will be back next week. I'm going to aim for next Thursday is what I'm aiming for, unless the world falls apart with the kids at school, so then it'll be Friday. So I'm aiming for Thursday. So you guys have a great weekend. I will talk to you next time. Thanks for joining. Have a great weekend. Bye, everyone.